Welcome to our session called How Incentives Influence Design Choice. I know there's some repeat people here from our earlier session, so please don't mind me repeating that I'm John Rath, Director of Operations for NY-GEO. I work alongside with Christine Hoffer and basically do whatever the board asks me to do, rate cases, PSC orders, PDF and credit sessions at the conference, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you for being here. We have three gentlemen here that are incredibly diverse speakers. They have incredible experience. Each one of them has told me that they would like anywhere from 1 hour to 12 hours to talk about what they're going to try to compress into somewhere between 8 and 13 minutes. So hopefully lots of Q&A from you folks. And then we'll be on into our lunchtime and mingling with the exhibitors and the sponsors. I do want to try to do a brief introduction of these folks because they have taken a lot of time to coordinate their presentations and share that with you. First off, we're going to have Jeff Love, and Jeff's got lots of diversity. He's an expert in green building and structure. He has a number of awards that I want to highlight. AEE's International Energy Engineer of the Year in 2022. No?
No, it's me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, Adam. Oh, whoa. Well, okay, screwed that up. So let me continue on with Adam. And Crane's New York Notable Leader in Sustainability in 2024. Congratulations. Now, where I should have been with Jeff. Jeff is Managing Director for Sustainable Comfort, and he is an energy and green building consultant in many, many places. He's got a master's degree in sustainable energy solutions and a bachelor in geology. So lots of professional certifications, more than I'll take time for here, but he does specialize in building efficiency and he understands incentives. And finally, but last but not least, Victor Braciszewski. He said I could try it, and so I'm trying it. Who works with the SmithGroup, designing a better future is the department that he works in. So he's got expertise in mechanical systems, plant energy modeling, design of geo heating and cooling system. And Victor is going to be part of many sessions, so that gives you just an indication of how knowledgeable he is. I think we've got you signed up for 3, right? Okay. So didn't do them justice, but I wanted to at least acknowledge their efforts. Let me talk about how you get your PDH and your CEUs, because that's what your job is here, and my job is to make sure that we get your name down. For those of you that weren't here in the first session, after this is all done, after the Q&A, you've got to come up at this table on this corner, and you've got to sign your name on either a pre-printed sheet with your name or a blank sheet that doesn't have any names on it yet, depending on whether you signed up in advance and paid the fee for the credits. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'll work with you when you get up here. Don't worry about it. What we're going to do is have each of the gentlemen speak in succession, and then we're going to have Q&A. I will come running around with the mic. Please acknowledge your name and what organization you're with. Okay? Let's get going. Jeff, take it away.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the introduction, John. Rarely does my bachelor's in geology actually sound good, but it's pretty fitting here. So yeah, as mentioned, I'm Jeff Love, Managing Director at Sustainable Comfort. I'm going to cover a couple learning objectives, and overall, the way to kind of look at this would be I'm going to talk about what funding opportunities there are for electrification in New York State for affordable housing. This isn't necessarily strictly for geothermal, but basically the question of to electrify or to not electrify. and then hand it over to both Victor and Adam, who are going to be a little bit more Victor in the weeds on the federal tax credits, and then Adam more on downstate design decisions. So specifically for my learning objectives is the overview of incentives and tax credits associated with geothermal installations, and then additional funding for multifamily housing related to energy efficiency. So what do we do at Sustainable Comfort? Thanks. What do we do at Sustainable Comfort? We are energy efficiency consultants and basically deal with alphabet soup. So we are able to help influence design by helping teams achieve certifications like Energy Star, LEED, National Green Building Standard, NGBS, and Passive House. And this is all with the goal to help the state meet its overall energy efficiency goals, help developers get ahead of any gas moratoriums that are coming out, and overall, because what we believe in and what we want to do. So this is a geothermal conference. So most of the people in this room are going to know more about the nuances of ground source heat pumps than I am. At Sustainable Comfort, we're helping guide teams towards making the right upfront decisions on what systems they want and what funding is out there, and maybe navigate federal or state requirements they already have to do, sometimes that they want to do, sometimes that they don't. So what if I don't care about any of that and I just need to build a project? I'm going to cover the mostly the New York State incentives, but wanted to give an overview of the other kind of energy efficiency incentives that are out there. So you have the energy tax credit that Victor's going to go into detail. I believe he mentions the 179D. That's also for commercial buildings. There's the 45L tax credit that's coming out. Those are 179D and 45L occur in here, and I believe the climate capital money are all part of the Infiltration Reduction Act. So 45L is for Energy Star and Department of Energy Zero Energy Ready Homes projects, specifically for multifamily. You have the here and the her rebates, incentivizing high efficient design. Those are a bit in flux. They've been supposed to come out. They're in the crosshairs right now with the federal landscape. So we're hopeful to see those, but it's been on pause. That's similar to the climate capital money there at the bottom, and that's already fluctuated between being a pay per amount of carbon that you're reducing to now being potentially just a pay per door incentive. And then the HUD Green Resilient Retrofit Program was a massive funding opportunity released a couple years ago now and is done. And that was anywhere between $40,000 to $80,000 per unit. One of the bigger incentive programs that we've seen. It had a couple different funding cycles, is now over, and I almost didn't even include it, but one of the themes that you'll see is that these incentives are always changing, even from year to year, month to month, day to day. There's been things that even just getting refreshed from looking at these a couple weeks ago, there was changes that I wasn't aware of. And the HUD Green and Resilient Retrofit Program is a good example. We had a project that got awarded $9 million. They were going to get to closing, federal landscape changes. They're no longer able to get that $9 million, complete design change. So it was something that they had worked on for, over a year, had the money awarded, could count on it. The climate capital is a good one where it's coming out. We're hopeful to see it, and that one's been over the news. So then specifically for New York State, I have more slides on this, but there's the HCR community. So the HCR Clean Energy Initiative, that's just for 4% and 9% low-income housing tax credit projects in New York State, and also open up to some other funding through CIF. There is the Climate Friendly Homes Fund. This is for mid-cycle retrofits for affordable housing. So, if you're not going to go through a full construction loan redevelopment process, but your boiler breaks, there's available money here just to then come in and help you either partially or fully electrify your system. There's the Clean Heat Program. I saw ICF had a booth. They're helping all the utilities kind of distribute the program, so it's utility specific. They all have their same amount of funds, and this has changed a lot. There's the Affordable Multifamily Energy Efficiency Program. That is through the utilities as well. This is for less robust energy efficiency designs. There's a NY-GEO Low Carbon Pathways Program. This is for market rate. A lot of these are only for affordable. And then NY-GEO Flex Tech. This is something that we use to help offset the extra design and energy efficiency, ASHRAE level 2 audits that we do and help with the kind of the upfront decision making. So all to say, this is not a comprehensive list of incentives. I want to reiterate, they're constantly being discontinued and changing, and keeping track of them all is very difficult. We like to joke in our industry that it's good job security, but at the end of the day, it's kind of just frustrating. And did see a new kind of website that's using AI to kind of compile a list of all these. It still is in beta. I haven't got a chance to use it, but something that I'd be really excited to see and then become more widely used, because there's a ton of money out there that teams can use to influence design. So I already gave a brief overview. I am only having 10 minutes. Each one of these could probably be its own separate 20-minute talk. I am going to run through that pretty quickly and just kind of show the high-level items of each. So HCR, Homes and Community Renewal, Clean Energy Initiative, again, affordable housing, tax credit jobs in New York State. You're eligible for up to $2 million to $9 million, depending on the level of rehabilitation you are. It's been pretty interesting. There was a lot of moderate rehab level 2 projects that before this came out thought they were moderate level 2 rehab projects. And then once they saw if they were substantial rehab, could be eligible for $9 million. So they were then trying to argue at first, hey, we're a mod level 2. We don't want to do all the extra requirements required of substantial rehab. That as soon as they see that they're eligible for an extra, almost $6 million, that doesn't look so bad. They're able to do the extra work. So the Clean Heat Program, this is administered through the utilities. Each utilities administering has slightly different rules and funding, and ICF's helping out. The program, I just looked, had 13 versions of the manual, has been produced in 5 years. So trying to keep track of that and trying to tell a developer what they have to be concerned about 2 years from now when you can't reserve money is very difficult. So this is kind of one of those things that everyone knows about, but you're not actually putting it in your pro forma and accounting on it until you're a lot closer to the construction process, not necessarily 2 years in advance. Another good example is Clean Heat. Up until the end of this year, could be layered in with CEI. There might be some loopholes, but now they're saying that it can't be layered in with CEI. So we're still trying to navigate that. That's all new information. There might be ways to allocate the money towards different energy efficiency measures and be able to take both. There's the Climate Friendly Homes Fund. This is for mid-cycle retrofits up to $25,000 per unit, and will incentivize full or partial conversion, and it must be affordable housing regulated there by HFTC, DHCR, HFA. So then again, we have the smaller energy efficiency programs, affordable multifamily energy. Should go back here. This was eligible for 5 to 50 units for a long time. It just changed, so it's eligible for 5 to 150. I think that's going to be a benefit. Most of the projects that have come in when we first found out about the program were like annoyingly 55 units and were then ineligible. So that wouldn't change things. That was new end of this last year. So affordable multifamily energy efficiency program, the incentive amounts there, $900 to $1,200 per unit, were for upstate projects. The upstate program is now being discontinued at the end of the year. They're coming out with just a downstate. Specifically, incentives will be a little bit higher. NY-GEO Low Carbon Pathways, would be the one that we see for market rate, but because the incentives amounts are a lot lower and there's not a bunch of other funding, we're not seeing a lot of teams use it. So a good example project, and Connor, I don't know if he's in here, but this came up in the last presentation. We didn't collaborate, but this is right in Albany. Really cool 4-phase project, deep energy retrofit, and I'm sure I'm running up on time. So briefly, 88 units, 40% savings, had a air source heat pump design going in, and the first iteration of CEI wasn't for rehabs at all, but the state was able to work with the team, get them $1 million as part of their tax credit application, and that really kind of, jump-started the entire thing. So they didn't get the federal tax credit because of some nuances with the state historic tax credits that I can't explain right now, so don't ask. Oh, you won't get a good answer. They were then able to utilize clean heat as it was an earlier part of the program, so $632,000 there. $1.1 million through CEI. There was a heat pump demonstration program through NYSERDA that came up, and this one just kind of like flew under the radar almost, which was just another $600,000 that came into the pro forma late, and then was also able to get another $352,000 for the geothermal system through the Attorney General office, and a lot of that was due to the flexibility and willingness of the development team to really go after these things and kind of put it in all their conversations. There was also a tax credit for low income that I think went to it, but I didn't put it in here. So you can see that for a $5 million system, they were able to pull in almost over half of that. And big highlights here was that 40% energy savings, and you can't see it from the picture, but they actually, focused on reducing their load first, which we all know very important, and they put a panelized system on the outside to, first and foremost, reduce their building load. So that's the design team. Not going to go through everybody. Also the construction team. It took a village for that one. And then I think we're going to do questions at the end, but if you want to think about them, just the New York State Homes and Community Renewal Initiative for electric MEP equipment, and then how many funding sources out there for multifamily housing. So thank you.
Great. Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Great. My name is Adam Shelly. I work for a company called Ecosystem Energy. We're an integrated engineering and construction company. The construction part of that is very critical. We're a group of engineers. We hold ourselves accountable for the work that we're designing. As part of that, we often guarantee the incentives to the end user. So we're starting to incorporate these incentives at the very beginning during the design, all the way through execution, and need to actually get the money from the different utilities or programs in order to execute the project and, obviously make money as a company. So we are acutely aware of the complexities of the incentives market. And so this session being called How Do Incentives Impact Design Changes is extremely important to me. And I hope that by the end of this, it's very important to all of you. So here's what you need to know. These are the objectives. Number one, incentives are not just subsidies to your existing design. Don't think about them as something that you just get at the end of any design that you produce and then expect money at the end of it. They should be viewed as design determinants and inputs. What does that mean? You should consider them at the very beginning before you're taking any pen to paper. You need to understand what the problem is. You need to understand what goals you're trying to achieve, what the client wants, and what's best for the design and your client, and therefore the construction and the incentive market. And good design unlocks a lot of different things, which we'll discuss. Just quickly before I continue, how many people in this room are involved in some sort of engineering design of systems or geothermal or anything else like that? Excellent, a lot of you. How many of you are part of a utility or an incentive program that gives out money? A lot of you, some of you, but I know there's a lot here at this conference. Speak to each other. You need to know each other, because the best way for these incentives to get implemented, which is something that both parties want to do, is to figure out what programs apply, what the small print is, what they're looking for, what the goals are. And that starts very early on. One of my first bosses, when I was younger, said something which I thought was really strange at the time because the internet existed. And he said, pick up the phone, pick up the goddamn phone. He had a much deeper voice than I did. And I didn't really appreciate what that meant until I got through my first couple projects and realized that I had made some very bad mistakes that would have easily been resolved had I picked up the phone and spoke to the person that was in charge of that program. That should not go away. I use AI a lot, but it cannot ever replace the information that's coming out on a daily, weekly, monthly basis that's refreshing this program, or how it can interpret different programs or achieve the same goal through alignment. Alignment is key. So incentives as design input. Every single program has a lot of different criteria. I think we all hear the headline, the certain buzz of a particular program, and think that that's it. That's going to help me size my geothermal field. That's going to help me size my heat pump. That's going to dictate what type of designs I do. But you really have to look under the hood and understand what those details are, because any single one thing can completely tank the design and force a last minute change on you, which is going to negatively impact the project, both in cost, incentive, performance, and just really unhappy everybody. All of these things that are in the details of the incentives should be included in the designs and specs. As a previous reformed MEP consulting engineer, I never thought about money. I didn't care about the cost of the construction. I cared about the cost of how many hours I was putting in. Working at Ecosystem, that changes everything because we care about the financial aspect of it. And so that's going in at the very beginning, into the design, into the specs, into the construction, into our subcontractor bids. So make sure to include that. Make sure you understand how it's impacting that design and how they relate to each other, because that's very important. The customer's demand influences the design that you're putting out and therefore influences the incentives. So you have to be aware of what's going inside of the customer building. You touched on it very quickly. Don't electrify waste. That is critical. I was speaking with someone yesterday at the happy hour event, and they said, we want to qualify projects very quickly. Like if we want to do a geothermal project, if we can go into a place and say, this doesn't make sense here and leave and not waste a lot of time, that's really important. One of the questions that you should be asking is, how much waste is in your building? Because if you need to electrify all of the waste that's in your customer building and they have a lot of it, that project is going to be cost prohibitive. So keep that in mind up front, and I think that will help you save time and the client's money in the end. To touch on some downstate incentives, Local Law 97 is still a major driving factor for a lot of decarbonization, electrification measures, and it's pushing the geothermal forward. Hello? Great. It's pushing the industry forward, which is great. Obviously, it's competing against a lot of other technologies, but we expect that this driver is going to continue, and so there'll be more opportunities to explore. If you can combine that cost along with the aging infrastructure of a lot of buildings in New York downstate and also the space constraints, a lot of these high stakes decisions require input of incentives, and that's before the design even occurs. So if you're not talking money with your potential client at the beginning, you are doing everyone a disservice. We can't afford, as whatever we are, employers, employees, taxpayers, tariff payers, we can't afford to design projects that are going to sit on the shelf anymore. So bring them early, understand everything, create the alignment between all of the different sources of money, because really those aren't things just happening to the building. The aging infrastructure, Local Law 97, the incentives, all these things are really coming together into one value stack, and so that should be appreciated at the very beginning. I'm moving quickly because I'm very excited for Victor to talk about the investment tax credits, which are obviously up to 50% of the entire cost of a geothermal project, and they might be disappearing soon the way things are going. So I'm going to keep moving through this. Designing around Local 197, all of your normal design decisions influence the performance of the project, the emissions performance, the energy consumption, all of that. So just keep those in mind. Incentive multiplier. Part of those phone calls should really be about the ability for different programs to stack on each other or to double dip. There's a fine print in every program that says you can double dip with this, you can't double dip with that. That's really important because you can really extract a lot of different value from all these different programs if you can do multiple of them. Your company sounds like they're doing a great job, and that is the mission, in order to be able to stack all of those and provide the most value. But there is a lot of traditional design and construction being done that is not doing that. They're not making it into the value stack, and we're generally concerned about that in the industry. So focus on that in your design, because this is all about design. Pick up the phone. Some design trade-offs. I'm not going to go into these. Anyway, everything impacts everything. That's the point. So tying it all together, the incentives impact the cost. It impacts the performance in terms of the quality of equipment that you're putting in, the amount of equipment that you're putting in. You really need to engage people early and often. That's the one thing that I keep repeating because I really want to impress it upon people. We do something similar to design build. It's sort of ESCO. And don't tell my company that, because that's not the messaging we're supposed to do, but that's fine. It's really disheartening to see design, bid, build projects ignore all of this. And so everyone in this room has to be responsible for that chain if no one is accountable for it. Because if everyone does this work and gets to the end of the project and it's too expensive because someone didn't include it at the beginning and the entire design has to change, that is a lot of waste. That's a lot of missed opportunity, I think, for the geothermal industry and for the MEP industry in general. I didn't realize how passionate I was about all this until I got up here. So anyway, Victor, I'll turn it over to you. And I'm excited for the Q&A.
Integrated firm, but I'm an integrated architecture and engineering firm called SmithGroup. So we work coast to coast, and I'm actually coming from a coast. I'm from San Francisco, so long trip out here. First conference, and it was a warm welcome with 3 panels, so looking forward to getting to know you guys throughout this conference. So we have some some learning objectives. I'm going to be talking more specifically about the energy tax credit and dual use property. So anybody experts in this in the room? Or have anybody familiar with these terms? Yeah? Okay. Expect some tough questions. We'll have some questions at the end related to those key aspects. So we're going to start with the tax credit and related to geothermal heat pumps. So New York GEO conference, we're getting back to our roots, the geothermal equipment, and then how to evaluate the dual use property part of that energy tax credit. So first we want to level set with just the background on the energy tax credit. So I'll start with that before we get into the dual use property. So first, everyone likes the origin story. So let's talk about the origin of this and where it applies. So it's a federal tax credit. It was around actually before the Inflation Reduction Act at a lower level, and then that kind of brought it up to the same level as solar and other technologies. It's also known as the investment tax credit, so ITC, so you probably hear folks mention that. The section 48, where geothermal sits, is actually called the energy tax credit. And within that, there's the definition for energy property that covers ground source heat pumps. So that's kind of the background on it. So who's eligible for it? You probably have heard this before. Here's the mix of potential client types. So for a for-profit, it's called a credit, but that same credit after the Inflation Reduction Act could be applied and called an elective pay or direct pay. That just means the IRS will cut a check out to these entities. and it does not apply to federal. So if you're a federal entity, doing a project, there was other dollars available outside of this. So for geothermal to apply, IRS refers to that as the geothermal heat pump property, which is energy property. And here are the credit levels that are available. So it starts with a base credit, and then there's a bonus. And, if maybe you're familiar with this, we'll talk about this more tomorrow. There's a session with Jacob Goldman that I'm on at 10:30. But if you see the dollar signs on the bottom, you can get, as Adam mentioned, up to 50% coupon or discount on that geothermal property. So some key ideas. So first is that you have to be qualified as energy property. So Section 48 regulations define what that is. And the IRS calls that geothermal heat pump property. So there's a definition in there that talks about what that means. And then what we're going to talk about later is the dual use property. So that's kind of, if you think of a geothermal heat pump property as the base scope, that's kind of the extra scope, the extra dollars you can get for your project. And that's going to be derived from a qualifying source, which is the base scope, the geothermal property. So some other, we probably shouldn't go any further without some other key aspects of it. There's some rules or some fine print to this. So there's this 1 megawatt rule. So if your project's larger than that thermally, so 284 tons of cooling, there's some extra rules, or maybe you don't get the bonuses as easily. There's a domestic content rule there that the big thing that has come out is if you're a direct pay entity, if you don't meet this and start in 2026, you don't get a check anymore. The amount goes to zero. And then there's also this idea of recapture. So you have to follow the rules for 6 years, and then you could do what you want with that energy property is kind of the key takeaway. It was a 6-hour flight out here. It existed before the flight. I'm pretty sure it exists today, but I can't say it exists next week. There's a lot of changes happening, but it does exist. It's written into tax law, so it's not undone by an executive order. The credit amount is not limited, so it's something that comes up a lot. It's not like some funds that are clawed back. It's no bank account to deplete. And then direct pay was available only after the Inflation Reduction Act. And then this dual use idea that we're going to talk about is applicable to geothermal systems. And here's some good news. So here's some projects that have been paid out recently. And if you even look at the top one, that's about $8 million. And each of those projects have applied this dual use idea. So, the checks are still flowing to tax exempt entities. So dual use equipment, let's get into that. So it's applicable to geothermal heat pumps. And this is the kind of idea. So you have your core energy property, the ground source heat pump, and then the ground heat exchanger. And then you have the dual use property. That's a kind of a question mark. So if you have something that's auxiliary heating and cooling, then you have to look at where the energy is derived for the dual use property to count. So one way to think about it is if you have qualified energy from the ground source heat pump, maybe that's the good stuff, that's the ice cream you want to eat, every night. And then unqualified is the fork, eating your vegetables. So on the course of a year, if you're only eating ice cream and you have the qualified energy, then the whole distribution, the whole downstream gets 100% of that credit. So now you've just got a great boon to your project. If you're prorated and you're over 51% unqualified to the distribution, you don't get any of that downstream credit. So what happens if you're over that, there's this term called cliff. So it used to be 75%, so there's some confusion in that. Originally it's 75%, now it's 50%, and after the final regulations. So if you're over 50% qualified, what happens? Well, you could call it a spork. You could also call it the distribution receives a 50 to 100% credit based off how much qualified energy you have. So in the end, it's about the 6 to 50% base credit that we talked about for the geo energy property. And then you could get the 3 to 50% credit based off how much qualified energy you have for the downstream or distribution. So I've left in some definitions. These slides are available later, so in case you want to look this up, this is pulled from the final regulations in Section 48. So feel free to look at this later. But basically, this talks about how the ground source heat pump or geothermal property qualifies if it uses groundwater, other ground fluids. And then the interpretation is that you could use that for the bore field ground source heat pump, design costs, and functionally interdependent elements. So controls some part of the electrical scope. And it also talks about energy distribution equipment may be considered. So that's that part for the dual use. So that's written into the regulations. So it's not some interpretation. You can go and point that out in the final regulations. But it does not, one thing to note, does not count domestic hot water. That was something that the industry was fighting for. But because they have this term of like heating or cooling a structure, domestic hot water, so just a heat pump that sole purpose is domestic hot water heating, would not count. So some examples, again, the qualified energy is the geothermal heat pump, and then everything else unqualified. So the boilers, chillers with like water-cooled equipment, air-cooled chillers, air-to-water heat pumps, that water-water heat pump in simultaneous mode, which is something I'll talk about in a second, but that is also not qualified energy. So the same ground source heat pump equipment, but operating in a simultaneous heating and cooling mode would not count. So let's get into some examples. Here's some schematics. So if you had a traditional plant, water-cooled chiller, cooling tower, boiler, that's zero qualifying energy, so nothing gets a credit. Let's say you swap that same building, but you plop in a ground source heat pump. Well, the energy property scope would be the whole scope of that system. So it's the ground heat exchanger, ground source heat pump, and downstream. Everything's qualified, so the downstream gets 100%. If you now change that, you have maybe central plant, and you change that, add some auxiliary, reduce the bore field size. You're doing some sensitivity testing to that. But your 75% thermal energy from your hybrid or your auxiliary equipment, then the downstream does not qualify. So zero on that. If you have a ground source heat pump, and let's say you're at that 50% cliff, then you can get that proportionate credit, 50% on the downstream, and the qualified energy from the energy property scope of the ground source heat pump equipment itself all the way to the bore field. And then this is one of the tricky parts here. So that same equipment, I have single piece of equipment. So think of that as like a 6-pipe modular, heat recovery chiller or something like that. Unfortunately, if that operates in simultaneous mode, it actually as a whole, the energy is over 75%. It does not count. In this case, you operate it in some of the time, so you get proportionate amount credit to that equipment, but you get the full credit to the ground source heat pump equipment or the ground or the bore field. This is the case where you operate it too much of the time, and it doesn't qualify in the equipment. And basically, how do you do those calculations? Well, it takes some building energy modeling, typically, some predictive modeling. So you have the annual building heating loads that you can do these different calcs in. Then you run this plan analysis, maybe do some sensitivity testing on different bore field sizes. And then you output the credit percentage. So this is how you can do the accounting of that thermal energy for this is you take this is like a central plant example where you look at the output thermal energy from the ground source heat pump and cooling and heating. That's the good stuff. That's the qualified energy. And then you look at that over the total amount delivered to every piece of equipment, airline units, the rooms, whatever your system type is. And then if that's over 50%, then you start to qualify for a proportion amount. And that's, and the next example is if you have the simultaneous piece of equipment, unfortunately the number 6 does not qualify. So you can't put that in the numerator like we were doing before. We were counting that from the same piece of equipment, and we were counting that towards qualified energy. It's a better operating mode that made sense to us as engineers. Unfortunately, the regulations, it's written into the final regulations. It does not qualify, so it has to go in the denominator as unqualified energy. So you can't count it. So you do the same thing. You look at the amount of time the equipment would be in heating or cooling directly from the bore field, and that helps you get the qualified energy. So one way of thinking about this is you take your annual loads, maybe you look at the largest bore field, and you look at the investment cost of that, annual energy of that, maybe some of the how much dual use you'll be able to qualify for, and you look at if your goals are met. Then maybe you iteratively kind of move through that process and down until you hit the 50% cliff, and you kind of stop when you meet your goals. So sometimes, you do more than 50% because you want to meet certain energy goals, or maybe it's a lead building and you need the larger bore field. So tomorrow I'll be talking about more of the analysis workflow that I use to do this, a little bit more of a case study on that. So if you want to join. And this was, Jacob's a friend, and he's a great resource. He'll be speaking tomorrow. But if you have any questions, he's the expert in this on the tax side. I'm just an engineer, so. But yeah, feel free to take his information down. If you email him, you get his latest slide deck, and if you'll get that webinar, you can find his latest on YouTube. So thanks, everybody.
And Casino.
I'm gonna be shocked if people don't have questions on this. So we'll get as many in as we can. Again, please let me get the microphone to you. You state your name and your organization. I see a hand.
And just a quick note on the tax credits. That was just for geothermal tax, the portion of that Section 48. There's a lot of other sections of Section 48, like thermal energy storage, where some of those things do qualify, but that's a different conversation, not for this conference.
Hello, Elizabeth McCorvey, Family Resource Center. I just would like to know, okay, I understand that you're saying that the ground source geothermal qualifies for the tax credits. So are you saying that air source doesn't? And anything about solar? Thank you.
Hello, hey, thanks for the question. So if you look at it in the context of the investment tax credit that I talked about, air to water heat pumps or air source are not defined as energy property there. There may be ways to, as Adam mentioned, there may be
geothermal, right?
Well, it's not, there's a series of definitions for energy property, and there's not one for air to water heat pumps. There is one for thermal energy storage.
Yeah.
So if you want to charge that tank, which is charging a tank means like adding thermal energy and storing it into a hydronic tank and then using that later. If you want to use a heat pump for the dual or the sole purpose of that, then you could qualify, but there's no bespoke kind of definition like there is for geothermal heat pump property that I talked about. That's explicitly called out and sits alone in Section 48 right now.
And same with solar. There's a solar component as well where you can get similar percent tax credits on that, but it has its own completely different set of rules and nuances to it. So getting some of these tax credits can be very complicated and a little bit expensive, especially if you need to transfer the tax credit. There's a whole procedure where you need legal memos, and your transaction might need tax credit insurance policies. It's a relatively complicated transaction that requires a lot of analysis and back work. But those fall under other parts of Section 48, not the geothermal specific section.
I would say the transfer is only for profit. So there's no ability to, if you're tax exempt, there's no ability to like send your check to someone else.
But yeah. Hi, I'm Vincent Spiteri with National Grid. Thank you, gentlemen, for the presentation. I have a question for Victor. I may have misunderstood you, but I just wanted to clarify. How long is the recapture clause in the energy tax credit?
Yeah, thanks for that question too. So if you read the final regs, it says 5 years, but based on how the accounting is done, it ends up being about 6. So I put a little squiggly in 6, so it's about 6 years. So the thing that was interesting there, go do the research yourself, but the recapture for qualified energy is if you go below 50%. So there could be a path forward where you only see the penalty if you go below 50%. So you could claim potentially higher, and then kind of, test your controls out or something to see. But yeah, do your research there. Talk to a tax expert before you take a stance like that. The most conservative thing would be if you have something that does simultaneous heating and cooling, account for that in its full use, and then look at what the qualified amount would be after that.
Edham Zondu from African Capital. Question for Jeff Love. You mentioned in the showcase of the project in Albany that the project was not qualified for federal tax credit because of some problem with historic tax credit. Would that be possible to share some details about that offline or live?
Perfect. Yeah, so this was a couple years ago, and it was when the geothermal tax credit, I believe, was 10%, and there was a non-combinable circumstance with the state historic preservation tax credits. I can try to get more information on you for that and follow up later, but I don't have any more at this time. I think it is right. You are allowed to do it now that under the new tax credit rules.
I don't think you can combine them sometimes. I think you have to choose one or the other, or they end up cannibalizing each other. So I think a lot of developers choose the historic tax credit or whichever one that is instead of the investment tax credit, depending on what percent eligibility it is. So it's just like it's a math question.
Thank you. Yep. My name is Hendricks with Welldan Energy Services. Gentlemen, all great presentations. I have a question for, I guess, Victor. On the energy tax credit, when you had the slide up, the only customers I saw were institutional. Therefore, commercial customers and industrial customers wouldn't qualify if they were doing a ground source heat pump for their buildings for the tax credit. Is that correct?
So, can you hear me? Hello? Okay, there it is. So I think you're, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're referring to the slide where I had some of the good news about checks coming out. Okay. That is a short list of beneficiaries of this credit. That was highlighting, if I remember correctly, that was the tax exempt folks that were getting direct pay.
Okay.
Just to highlight, because that was brand new with the Inflation Reduction Act, the fact that, I mean, so historically, K through 12 schools, other schools have not been funded well through the federal government. This is the first time that they could help meet some of the infrastructure needs through some federal policy. So it was highlighting the fact that institutions like that could receive a direct pay check. It wasn't to show that only those, types of entities can benefit. If you're for profit, you get a tax credit. And then there's other programs that Jeff mentioned, like 179D, that are deductions. So a credit's the best one of the two. Deduction is based off of how many, like your tax rate and things, but you always want a credit.
And just to elaborate a little further, the for-profit entities, if they can take the tax credit directly, it just comes off their tax bill because it's a credit. If they can't take it directly, like a co-op or some other for-profit entities that don't pay taxes, they may have to sell their tax credit, and that's where the transfer process comes in.
Since we have an administration in Washington that doesn't seem to care much about renewable energy or energy efficiency, have there been any indications that they're going to try to, I know this isn't law, but they're going to try to slow down or renege or
Yes.
back off on any of these?
They've made it very clear that they don't like a lot of the tax credits, most of the tax credits. So my view, and this is political and an opinion, is they're going to come for it. There's going to be a large package that they come out with a bunch of executive orders to try to kill off every tax credit possible. And whether or not they can do it is going to be left up to the judicial system or the legislative branches. But it doesn't matter because effectively it'll be killed because developers and investors won't be able to rely on those when they go to build it and finance it. It's going to be very hard to do if the president is fighting them. The best way to combat that, other than political lobbying and stuff like that, just start your project right now. Spend 5% of the money and you're locked into the old rule. And so you'll be able to be grandfathered in and you'll get the tax credit because it'll start now. So let your customers know they got to start building right now to make sure they get that 50% off discount. Lots of generalizations there, but that's short.
And I think a good example on the kind of the funding side would be the climate capital money. So the green resilient retrofit funds, that's been all over the news. That was paid out, so not a tax credit, but that was physically paid to the bank. The funding agencies had the money. They're ready to go give it to clients of ours who had projects in the pipeline. And then that was instantly halted. And you can see that it's all over the news. And people are suing each other, and that's still kind of going forward right now. So depending on what type of money it is, it's happening fast.
Hi, my name's Kyle. I'm from Wind Companies. I have a question for Victor and for Adam. So on the domestic content bonus and the advice you just gave to get into the ground now and start your project, does that also apply to the domestic content bonus? And were any of the projects that you put up before, do they include the domestic content bonus, and what needs to be included?
Yeah, thanks. So just want to give a plug for tomorrow's presentation. Jacob Goldman and I are going to present, and we're going to talk about the uncertainty about all this. And what Adam said is his take. We don't know if it's going to go away. There's people that think that it won't. People think that it will. It all comes down to the desire to pass or extend the Trump era, the first round tax cuts. So that's when it comes down to. It's just crunching the numbers there. So to get around, or to say that to get in the ground now, 5% to start your project, you could do it by starting your drilling of your actual project too. Would be another way. Without the 5%, you could just start drilling it. It's probably the best way to kind of lock it in. But even if you locked it in, who's to say, at the super extreme, like Jacob will go through this, like the 10 types of scenarios, each one super unlikely, but the super most unlikely scenario would be, as soon as it's passed, then everything stops. So it's just a matter of dealing with that uncertainty. There's no kind of precedent for something like that. And then with regard to domestic content bonus, it changes based off year. I think it's something like 40%. We were just talking about this, Jacob and I, about geothermal. I think about 40% of similar product. But if it's different types of energy property have different requirements, so just kind of double check that and double check the year that you're kind of starting construction to meet that.
Yeah, there was at the beginning there was a flat percentage for domestic content. It needed to be 45% or whatever, and then escalated by 5%. But they changed it to match the specific equipment and material because it was easier. It was getting very complicated in the supply chain. So that will be subject to change along with everything else in the laws. Should I put laws in quotes moving forward, I guess? Laws.
Hey, thanks for the talk, you three. My name is Marshall Pontrelli with McPhail Associates. Two, I think, quick questions. The 284 tons to meet these criteria, what was I going to say?
That's the 1 megawatt rule.
Yeah, the one
wage.
1 megawatt rule, that comes from the energy model, not from the installed heat pump capacity. Because those typically the heat pump capacity will be higher than the energy model, and we've run into that issue.
I forget where they landed. I think at one point it was connected load. I think there's two ways to calculate it. One's connected load, and the other one might be nameplate. Yeah. Does yours not work?
Should we both hold it? Yeah, I think my mic was dead, so we had to arm wrestle over this one. Yeah, that's a good question. Unfortunately, a lot of the terminology is more clear if you think of it for solar, 1 megawatt, what does that mean for geo, or things like that. But probably the most conservative thing to do is look at what they call a nameplate. So if you have a nominal tonnage, the model has a tonnage on it, use that, right? There are,
just to catch everyone up, the 1 megawatt and the 284 are equivalents, and that impacts whether or not prevailing wage labor is required on projects. If it's over 1 megawatt, you have to do it to get the bonus, the higher rates. If it's under, you're exempt from that.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, that sounds good.
There is a second way, though. Check out the final regulations. There's a second way about aggregating, which we kind of think you could be kind of your block load from your energy model. But then they say contact an energy commissioner or something for approval. That person doesn't really exist. So, yeah, have fun with that. But you could make an argument for that.
Okay, great. The other one for all the energy accounting, the slides that you were showing, all of that was in units of power, right? Those were in units of tons rather than units of total accumulated energy over the year. Because that's another discrepancy that we've sort of, you can shave load in certain ways and meet a ton of total annual energy, but you're not meeting, a peak load criteria of 50% or whatever it is.
Yeah. I'll show this a little bit more tomorrow, but it's actually energy as for the year. So it's not, if you look at the dual use property calculation, it's derived for the year. So that's why you can have relatively small bore fields, but they just need to shave on peak conditions. You got a little bit of hybrid equipment. You still use your geo source energy for most of the year. But the 1 megawatt is more of a power. So that's like the nameplate capacity would be a power, and then dual use is energy for the year.
Thanks.
Hi, Megan Kennedy from John W. Danforth. On the solar side of the ITCs, we've been seeing penalties for customers that are getting tax advantage financing. So municipal leases for K through 12 school districts. Is that true for GEO as well?
I think it's true for everything. There's like up to a 15% haircut for tax credits if you get energies or subsidized financing. Yeah. And sorry in advance.
Let's do one or two more questions if we have them. Oh, okay, then let's give these gentlemen a round of applause. Are you folks staying at the conference for the rest of the day anyway? And people can ask you questions. Great. Okay, just a reminder, if you need credits, PDH, come up to the front. If not, it's networking time and lunchtime, and we'll see you back in 1:30. Thanks.